Yeah, I mean, essentially, people who are serious artists and those who are not. I mean, Refik Anadol is not a serious artist. Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst are, as is said in Alexander Rabo's piece for us last week, they are sort of HR managers. They care about ethics and these incredibly boring, prosaic things, which have no relevance to the art.
Would you spend tens of thousands of dollars on these pieces of art? These are some of the pieces flogged by Christie's in a recent auction. The catch is that they're all made by AI. Does that change the way you see them? And do you think that AI could ever make good art? I'm Cindy Yu, The Spectator's assistant editor. On today's Spectator TV, I'm talking to The Spectator's art editor Igor Toronyi-Lalic, who thinks that AI can make great art, and art historian Bendel Grosvenor, who argues that no, it can't. Bendel's new book is The Invention of British Art. Now, I think the best way to get into this is just to get the two of you in debate. I mean, you have relatively different views. Bendel, you recently wrote that AI art can never really have value because it can't really have a perception about the world. Explain your position.
Well, I think it can obviously have a dollar value. We've just seen at Christie's, they've had a recent sale about AI art. Some of it made a lot of money, some of it didn't. But whether it can have a real creative value, I'm not quite so convinced because I value the human input into art. I think ultimately the human imagination is what makes art great. Art which really stirs us as human beings has to come originally from the human imagination. And then that's before we get onto the kind of, the basics, like the craft of it. I mean, does that actually look any good? I'm not sure. It's kind of screen-based generic content based on stuff scraped from the internet. I'm not persuaded by what I've seen yet.
And Igor?
I mean, I'm not persuaded by any of the works at the Christie's show. They're total trash. But there are amazing works of AI art and have been, not just in the last few decades. I mean, we need to realize that the use of algorithms, of rules, of mathematical kind of sets of decision making has been part of art forever. I mean, it's part of, vast compositions of fugues, of counterpoint. It's, we can look at Mozart and his musikalisches Würfspiel, which is, musical dice games, where, he offers you a chance to create waltzes in the Mozartian style. And, in the last 2 decades, there have been a couple of artists that I think are fantastic with AI. One is John Raffman, who's done some incredible films, Counterfeit Post, that sort of look at imagined sort of memories that people have and sort of produce these incredibly strange new realities. Pierre Huy did a fantastic show at the Serpentine a decade ago, again trying to get AI to reconfigure an image that someone had in their brain, and the sort of the slow process by which the computer is attempting to reconfigure this image is really strange and eerie and very, very kind of haunting in a profound sense. So I'd say that there's every possibility of the use of AI. It's just not the commercial stuff. As usual, the commercial stuff is crap. But it always has been, always will be.
So the difference for you, Igor, is not between AI or human, but between commercial or slightly more, avant-garde, out there stuff.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, people who are serious artists and those who are not. I mean, Refik Anadol is not a serious artist. Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst are, as is said in Alexander Rabo's piece for us last week, they are sort of HR managers. They care about ethics and these incredibly boring, prosaic things, which have no relevance to the art.
Bendel, what do you think? In the hands of the right kind of serious artist, could AI be a good tool?
Well, I suppose it can be. I mean, in this age of sticking bananas to walls, you can get away with anything. I think what it represents, though, is the sort of a broader, perhaps culmination of a centuries-long process where the idea and the craft have become sort of unmoored in art. And a long, long time ago, the artist had an idea and then either painted it or drew it or sculpted it, sometimes with workshop assistants. And now we've we're getting to the point, certainly in the post-war period, we've got to the point where the concept is what we really value, and the craft of it, the production of it, is not so important. So, classic example for Damien Hirst in his spot painting. So he has the idea of a spot painting, but then his workshop assistants make it, and some of his art is now, some of this kind of stuff is made by machines, all of which is fine. But we're still privileging the concept. My concern with the AI stuff is that it's so useful, so overly used by some artists, that we're eradicating the concept, the imagination, which is, as I said at the beginning, for me, the really key part of where art comes from. And we're reducing the concept to just a prompt. I mean, literally now all we can do is prompt the AI to do something and stand back and see what happens and decide if we like it or not. And I think, I'm sorry to be pessimistic, but I think that's rather a bleak direction of travel for human creative endeavor.
We love pessimists here at The Spectator. Igor?
I mean, it's ludicrous. It's a ludicrous characterization of what AI is. Yes, sure, that's what you can do on your computer, but most artists actually train the data in very specific ways. I mean, if you really understood what's going on, I think you'd realize that there's a huge amount of
What do you mean? Are they actually doing the algorithms themselves? They're coding? Or?
Yeah, they're coding. So, I mean, of course, at the most basic primitive level, I mean, just like painting by numbers is also painting. There is a primitive way of using AI, which is typing something into, DALL-E yourself, or creating your own models, creating your own training data, creating your own data sets. This itself is a craft. Coding is a craft. I know there are people who don't understand that, but
is it an art? Is coding an art?
Well, I think it's definitely a craft. I'd say it's an art if you have the brain and capacity and the imagination, as Bendor is saying, to expand what sensibly you can perceive. So it's the combination of imagination, originality, and the craft of using this tool. It's does he deny that photographers can be artists? I mean, not all of them are. Most of them are jobbing humans who do very little of aesthetic worth. But it's a tool that can be used to great aesthetic heights. So I think invoking Damien Hirst is a sort of, no one takes Damien Hirst seriously. It's sort of the cliche of those who want to sort of beat modern art. It's of no real kind of critical value to invoke the worst artist or one of the worst artists. It's easy. It's an easy argumentative point, but let's look at the best of each age. Let's look at the best photographers rather than the worst photographers, and you'll see that these are just tools in the sort of ever-changing nature of progress of mankind. We find new ways of making things. We're curious. That's how things develop.
Well, if we're going to talk about making cheap debating points, I think just saying you don't understand it is a great one. But look, all I'm saying is that the direction of travel seems to be quite clear, and it's about, if we stand back for a second, it's about the extent to which we value and cherish human input in what we consider to be great or good art. And as you can see from this discussion, it's so easy to disagree on what is actually good or great art. I mean, you can airily say all the stuff in the Christie sale is terrible, and probably I'd agree with that. But we can all like or not like what we see. My point is just, as I was saying, to stand back and consider slightly more deeply where we're going in what we consider to be the great representative examples of human creative endeavor.
Bendor, do you think it would change the way you see AI art if you were, if the good AI artists, maybe they don't exist right now, but maybe they will one day, were kind of mixing code and rewriting algorithms in a way that the artists of previous ages mixed paints? Would that give that back a bit more agency to the artists and a bit more creativity for you?
It could do. It all depends on the extent to which they rely on the code, I suppose, or the AI, whatever we're going to say it is. So, yeah, if the humans can create something which we consider to be great art, then I'm all in favour of that. But from what I've seen so far, it's not very encouraging.
Yeah, and what about one day?
One day, well, I don't know. I mean, I'm quite glad we saw off NFTs as quickly as we did. But this stuff is like a sort of many-headed hydra. It's difficult to keep down. I don't know. I don't know. Here I'm going to be slightly optimistic, Sydney. I think possibly the overwhelming cascade of AI-made creative bullshit is actually going to have a counter effect. And perhaps we're going to be slightly more keen to value not just the concept in art, but the craft of it. Perhaps we might even, dare I say, go back. But relish again entirely human-made creative endeavor. I think it's quite interesting to see in the art market signs of that. I was quite surprised by how this Christie's much vaunted, much promoted Christie's AI sale didn't actually do that well. A lot of the stuff didn't sell. And what did sell made below estimate, and the estimates were already quite sort of low. So I found that quite reassuring. By contrast, if you look at other areas of the art market, like the old master market, they're really strong signs of health in that. So, you know, as someone who's a cheerleader for the old-fashioned kind of art, I think that's gives me glimmers for hope.
There is a problem with the over-conceptualizing of art, and it has been in the past. But I think we're moving away from that. You know, further, there's a lot of craft within AI, as far as I can see, and a huge amount of human sort of interactivity with it. I mean, essentially, you know, the artist is still king, as Alexander Raubo says in his piece. You determine many of the variables within AI art, just as you do within computer music, which is a sort of venerable part of the canon, been there for 60 years, just as you do in certain fugues. There are a set of rules, but actually, you know, there is still human input. But there are a set of rules. I mean, fugues, counterpoint, is not just anything goes, freedom of expression, just my imagination. You know, this is a sort of a very sort of limited idea of what art is about. I mean, if it's just about imagination, Bender can see off. Bach is not a serious artist. Almost anyone in the Baroque period is not a serious artist. No gallant composer is a serious artist. All modernist surrealists are not real artists if it's just about imagination. You know, you're counting off everyone outside of a very narrow range of artists who lived between, you know, early 19th century and the beginnings of the 20th century. It's an absurd idea of art that, you know, you don't really believe in an old art. I mean, you believe in 19th century art.
Well, keen to hear what Bendel has to say about that.
Sorry, I got lost some way back. I think, to be honest, perhaps the problem here is that what I view as AI art is different from what Igor rules as various, you know, perfectly acceptable tools which artists can use. My concern is the most of the AI art I was led to believe we'd be talking about today is limiting in its the way it constrains artists. And I think that's why I keep coming back to the concept and the imagination. I mean, fine, I'm delighted that Igor has found some examples of what he calls AI art that like him, but which sound to me like they're actually sort of, you know, bits of computer craft and programming code, whatever. But I think my broader concern is if we value and if we're prepared to accept that art can be founded on the kind of AI which is basically a repository of everything, mostly image-led, scraped from the internet, which artists can then kind of use as they like or not, don't like, but mostly rely on, then that's a very limiting form of art. I mean, in a way, it goes back to David Hume's conception of how we form our knowledge of the world is everything based purely and only on what we derive from our senses. Whereas, you know, the five senses, whereas the computer is basically visual and it can hear a bit, but it's mostly visual, the stuff that these, what I consider to be AI art is based on. Whereas someone like Immanuel Kant is much more interested in senses and the imagination, that bridge between us and the universe. And I think ultimately, it's that element of human experience and imagination of navigating the world around them, which is what makes art sublime and great. And from the vast amount of stuff I've seen, I'm delighted that Eagles found some good stuff, but from the vast amount of stuff I've seen, it's tremendously underwhelming, tremendously limiting, and more alarmingly, if we as a human society decide that that's fine, then what is the end point? What's the end point for artists, musicians, just to rely on a prompt and a button and a screen? What even is the point of journalists? I mean, where do we go with that? So that's why I'm very proud to fight the resistance against this.
It's a caricature. You're caricaturing it endlessly. It's not a prompt. It's not a press of a button. It's like, photographers. Do you consider photography just a click of the button?
No, because going out and seeing the world, and a camera is just literally a means of capturing what you decide as a human to see in the human world, the real world around you.
That's all that AI is doing. I mean, that's all that. It's the same tool. You keep on thinking of AI making the work. It's not. There's the human interaction with AI is obviously the interesting thing. I mean, there could conceptually be something interesting in the first completely self-made art by a computer. I'd quite like to see that. But the interesting thing, obviously, is the way that humans interact with the tool. The same way that the humans interact with a camera is interesting, rather than the camera. You keep on being like, oh, this camera made this work. How stupid. How, it's like, or this paintbrush made this painting. That's what you're sounding like. It's like, it's so ridiculous. This paintbrush just, I mean, there is a human behind the tool. You do realize that?
Look, I didn't come here to be patronized. So, or even misunderstood.
Let's move this on to the question of copywriting, because Bendor, that's something that you write about quite a lot in the piece. About you mentioned earlier the word mimicry, and it's kind of worse than mimicry at the moment, at least, in the sense that these large language models or generative AI are scraping bits from what's out there. Tell us about what the dangers there are.
The dangers are, I think, more broadly, that we diminish the value of human artists. And you might say, fine, if I want to go and I, as a terrible botching amateur artist, can go and make a pastiche of, say, a work by David Hockney, and the result that comes out looks like a Hockney, but I've just been copying Hockney. But that's how artists progress all the time. We take influences from other people. I think the difference is when it's done by AI, the result is still similarly as crap as my Hockney-esque daubs, but the purpose of it is monetization. The purpose of it is to demonstrate that this machine can do these things, and that's monetizing to get share value, profits, traffic, advertising, revenue, whatever. And it's doing that by basically stealing David Hockney's work, for example, and it's doing that on scale, which has never been seen before. And I think we're at a pivotal moment here, actually, that if we decide by making copyright laws so much looser and easier for AI tech firms to take even the work of living writers, artists, musicians, filmmakers, whatever, then it's one of the sort of greatest, like a bank heist in terms of overall dollar value, pound value, because we're just giving that away for free. We're transferring collectively human creative endeavor, and we're giving it all to a handful of tech companies in California for literally no money. And I think if we signal that, that's a really sad move. And personally, if it was up to me, I would see almost a value in the UK government going the other direction and saying, well, let's make the UK uniquely the major jurisdiction in the Western world that actually protects intellectual property, and maybe we could get the creatives to come here and try and do something different.
But of course, that doesn't seem to be the direction that the current government consultation is going in, because they seem to be more interested in attracting AI companies to come invest in the UK. And Igor, this kind of scraping, I mean, it is part and parcel of what makes AI good at recreating or at coming up with new pieces in the style of, for example, Hockney or Hearst or whoever it is. it is part and parcel of what the technology is. Surely, as a journalist, you're also concerned about the content infringements here.
You can't stop people being influenced. I mean, are you going to, should Berlioz have been arrested for using the Dies Irae by Bernard of Clairvaux, or,
But it's not
Liszt or
just
Chopin?
influence, it's regurgitating.
Yeah, that's regurgitating. The Dies Irae is literally regurgitated in their works to commercial value, because we don't listen to the Gregorian chant that Bernard of Clairvaux originally possibly composed, attributed to Bernard of Clairvaux. We actually listen to the Symphonie Fantastique or various pieces by Chopin or Liszt, and millions of pounds have been made off the back of recordings of what was originally a Bernard Clairvaux piece of music that's incorporated within other people's work. You cannot stop essentially, I mean, there's a brilliant theorist and composer and artist, Jennifer Walsh, came up with this idea that we should see AI as fan fiction. It's essentially, you can't stop people being enthusiastic about other people's works and using the tools that are there at their disposal to absorb it and recreate
the difference
something
in
new.
your example is that the Gregorian chant was long out of copyright and in the public domain. So actually you can, I mean, I'm not arguing against inspiration, far from it. That was specifically the point I began with. I'm arguing in defense of copyright and intellectual property.
So only the last 100 years.
Ripping it off.
Well, Igor, do you not believe in copyright?
I don't believe in copyright. No, I mean, absolutely not. I'm a libertarian. I also just think you're never going to stop it. Essentially, it becomes a sort of little club, and the people, who create art within a certain sort of visible realm are forced to pay up.
But do you worry that if you do take that argument to its extreme, that copyright doesn't exist, that actually you will be suffocating the art industry because no artist would ever be able to sustain themselves?
I think that's just not true at all. I think what the people who won't be able to sustain themselves are artists who should never have been artists in the first place. People who create slop. I mean, yes, thousands of illustrators and visual effects artists, people that I'm sure Bender Grover has in high regard, being a fan of contemporary culture, really cares about their livelihoods. I mean, I don't care about artists who make kind of stupid little memes on Instagram being, out of a job because of AI. They should find greater value in the world. Maybe, start to do something with their hands and craft something proper and important, or think up of something really imaginative with AI and become a great artist. The point is the mediocre, middling art. I'm not going to say artists. Illustrators, the people below artists, the artistes will be, absolutely.
If there's no such thing as copyright, even the great artists will not have their intellectual property protected. I mean, you cannot surely not to believe in copyright, Igor.
I mean, I absolutely do not believe in copyright. I mean, it's only there. It only exists for 100 years in order to feed certain.
Yes, in the idea that intellectual property can still be property. Just because it's not physical doesn't mean it doesn't belong to someone for having come up with it, or at least for a period of time.
It's the horse has bolted with this one. I mean, too many artists are understandably have used and reused people's work in fascinating ways. I mean, I mentioned this last time we were talking. Sturtevant is a very funny example of completely undermining copyright law itself, which is an absurdity. It's a sort of commercial thing, really. I mean, if you care so much about the monetization of art, then you should really not be in favor of copyright law. It favors those who are biggest and most kind of commercially sort of, it sort of defends these big kind of corporate brand behemoths. But Sturtevant would copy Warhol's, and Warhol would often say, if he's asked how do you make your prints, he'd say, ask Sturtevant, because she used to copy them so well that she knew better than him. Which was and I don't really like conceptual art, but I always found that quite a funny bit of conceptual art. I think in this realm, the ethics is the most boring and prosaic and uninteresting aspect. It's for HR managers. This is not the realm of people who are serious about aesthetics. Fine, let the lawyers fight it out. I don't care. I mean, this is not.
I think you're an anarchist. I don't think you're a libertarian. Bendel,
Right.
Bendel, last word to you. You've been waiting very patiently.
Oh, I just written a book on the long history of British art called The Invention of British Art, and literally one of the pivotal moments in the emergence of British art as a cohesive, successful idea is when William Hogarth gets passed in the House of Commons the first visual copyright law in this country. And it meant for the first time that individual artists could make money from the idea in their head rather than the labor of their hand. And when you're going from a society as we were, when the production of art was very, very strictly controlled by a certain small, tiny elite at the top of society, and that's how we ended up basically producing just portraits. When you got Hogarth saying that now artists could make money from their own ideas through the copyright law and in conjunction with new technologies like printing, this is the real moment when creativity in this country flourishes and takes off in the 18th century. And it's very interesting that one of the first cases that William Hogarth is involved with in then defending that copyright law is the work of a botanical artist called Elizabeth Blackwell. And she was a very talented drawer of flowers. And she published a little sort of botanical dictionary with her illustrations in it, and she'd hoped to make her living that way. And it was immediately ripped off and stolen by, male publishers who didn't give a damn about her. And William Hogarth comes to court and defends, and she wins the case. And it's just illustrative of the way in which art, as something widely practiced amongst all sections of society, not just the rich who can afford in Igor's non-copyright world to do it without any money at all, absolutely depends on the rigorous enforcement of intellectual property for some period of time. And if we hadn't had that in this country, then art, in fact, in this country and everywhere, would be very, very different.
And of course, that's a really important live discussion at the moment, and we will see how it develops. Bendel and Igor, thank you so much for joining Spectator TV.